What's up, guys? Drone worship in your face. I got here a little early to work, so I've been getting a lot of messages about the 3DR Solo now that my videos are becoming more popular. And I wanted to put out kind of a do's and don'ts thing with the Solo so you guys have an understanding of why you might be having a certain issue or how to fix that problem. So the biggest one that I get all the time is, hey, I bought a GoPro Hero 3 Plus, and the Solo won't communicate with it. I don't know what to do. Okay, the first thing you need to do is check the firmware on the camera. So you need to plug it into your computer and see if it has the most updated firmware on the camera. Because if it's an older firmware base, the Solo might not understand it when you plug it into the gimbal. Okay, so number one is go ahead and check your firmware. If that does not work, okay, then you need to contact 3DR, whoever you bought it from. You need to get in touch with them and let them know that your GoPro is not working with your unit, so there could be something wrong with it. Return policy might be in play. Okay, so just consider that for a sec. If it also, an easy way to tell that normally is if the camera continues to reset. Once you plug it in, if it turns on, turns off, turns on, turns off. That's normally firmware related problems with the Solo not communicating properly with the camera because the firmware isn't correct. Okay, same thing goes for GoPro Hero 4. If you connect your GoPro Hero 4 to the 3DR and you're not getting FPV, but it is on, but you have no camera controls, it's probably because your firmware is not up to date for the gimbal to understand the GoPro. So you need to plug it in. Mine runs on 5.0. Okay, so if it's a GoPro Hero 4, you're probably going to need to update to the latest firmware version 5.0. For the GoPro Hero 4. I don't know what it is for GoPro Hero 3 Plus, but just consider that that's probably your most likely issue. Also, setting up your GoPro properly in the settings of the Solo app or the Solix app is a key, very must-do thing. So make sure that you are accurate with what you're telling your Solo's app that you're running on, that it's the proper camera that you're using. Okay? Number two, dead gimbal. We call this the limp gimbal. Okay, so what happens is you plug your GoPro in, you turn on your Solo, and it's limp, right? It doesn't function. There's something wrong. It's not activating. It's not even trying to do anything. Okay, that can also be firmware related issues, but we find that most of the time, if you pull the battery out of the camera for like 5 seconds and you put it back in and you plug it back into the gimbal, absolutely no problems. Another thing to be aware of is that the Solo antennas are directional. So let's say you're surrounded by a bunch of trees, okay? And you take off and you start flying over the top of the trees, and the Solo the signal starts getting impeded by trees like this. You're trying to aim the signal at the Solo that's up here, but there's a tree in the way. As the signal starts meeting all the trees and all the brush and all the buildings and whatever else you're trying to fly through, it will start losing signal fast. Now, if you have Solix, you can watch your DBI output on the top. You can actually see when it starts losing the signal. So that's why inner city, the Solo just does not get very good range. You can't go too far without it, resetting. The other side of that is there is tons and tons and tons of Wi-Fi interference in residential neighborhoods, towns, and cities. If you get outside those residential neighborhoods, towns, and cities, you can take the Solo out for miles on the alpha antennas, even the FPV-LR antennas. You can really clear some good distance with the Solo. Like I said, I've almost made a 4-mile round trip with my Solo. So you can definitely get some good distance. Inner city, with a nice clear opening, like over the water and stuff, I get about 3,400 and some odd feet. But if you get me outside or just a huge lake where there's no Wi-Fi interference out there, I can cruise out a couple miles, man. Farmland, farm country, perfect. Remember, if you're going to be flying inner city, the further you take the Solo out with trees and stuff, the higher you want to keep going up. That way the signal constantly maintains a direct signal to the Solo. Okay, the moment you start getting trees and branches and all this other stuff in the way and buildings and stuff, well, then it's going to have a hard time sending that signal to the Solo. So it's a directional bird. That's what it is. It's not going to fly like a Phantom or any of the other stuff. So consider that. Next thing, autonomous flying. And I want everyone to understand, it's not that I don't trust your abilities or your skill set level. The Tower app can be very complicated to use and learn properly, okay? I did it once. I thought I was prepared for it. It was really cool that it did work. But I got to say, when I started going through all the features and playing with things, that is definitely a don't. Do not adjust the parameters unless you really know what you're doing on the Tower app. Keep things very simple if you're planning missions, unless you feel comfortable enough to transition into adjusting flight parameters, because those can make some very major mistakes and you can lose your solo very quickly by messing with the parameters on Tower. So keep things simple if you're going to be using the Tower app. All right. Proper charging of the battery. Guys, if you're not going to be using your solo, do not let it sit on the shelf fully charged. Put it in storage mode. I would say about 50% is storage mode. You're not going to hurt the cells. It's not going to keep draining the battery. It's going to stay at about 50%. Okay? If you leave it on a full charge and you're not flying it, all you're potentially doing is damaging the cells. Okay? If you're not going to fly it in the next 2 days after charging it, then you need to discharge the battery. Get it down to about 50%, 40%, and leave it there. That's storage status, basically. Don't, because the longer it sits there on a charge, number one, if it realizes you're not using the battery over a certain period of time, then it's going to start to slowly discharge that battery. Okay, it's a smart battery. Now, I know people are going to say, well, there's no proof behind that. There's no proof behind that. All batteries discharge. I get that. Okay. But it does it to save itself. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you'll start to kill your battery really quickly when you do that. Your battery life will just go, and then you'll end up buying a new battery for the solo within a couple months if you continue doing it that way. So properly taking care of your solo battery is a must. It's a must do. Okay? Something to think about here. With a good solo battery, you should get 15 to 17 minutes of flight time. Never, ever, unless it is a complete emergency, would you ever want to run your solo past 15% battery before it touches the ground. Always have it landed and on the ground before 15%. In an emergency situation, for whatever reason it hasn't quite made its way back to you yet, and you still need it flying, I have run the solo battery down to 1% battery and landed it. However, the battery was no good after that. It toasted the battery doing that. Now, in that situation, if you're not going to make it back in time, I would rather toast a battery than lose a solo and a GoPro. So it wasn't a question of my mind. Bring it back, run her down to 1%. Me and Ron were at this gas station when it happened, and I landed this thing on exactly 1% battery. So, can it do it? Yes. Is it good to do it? No. Will you most likely crash your battery in? Yes. You will probably end up having to replace your battery if you run it that low. It will damage the cells. It will be no good. So, 15% is the absolute lowest you want to run your solo battery. And if it's a decent battery, you should get anywhere from 15 to 17 minutes of flight. Okay? Is it necessary to calibrate the compass on the solo every time you go out and fly? The answer to that is no. It is not necessary. I have taken the solo halfway across the United States from where I'm at, never done a compass calibration, got it up in the air, no problems. Even the Open Solo guys have said, from the 3DR group, the Open Solo team, have said it is not necessary to calibrate every single time you fly. Okay? So if that was a worry you were having, go ahead and brush that off. As long as your initial compass calibration is good, don't mess with it unless you have to. Okay? If you start noticing that your solo is doing some very weird things in the air and it's having some kind of problems being stable and it just seems like it's not the normal solo you're used to, land it immediately. Do not keep flying it. There is obviously something wrong with the unit, okay? And most of the times it comes back to an IMU calibration, okay? You can fix a majority of the problems the solo is having with a quick IMU calibration. If you continue flying it, regardless of knowing it has problems, most likely it's going to end in a disaster for you. And I am kind of sick of reading about all these people that are like, well, it says it's doing all this, so I continued flying and then it crashed. Dude, you did it to yourself, man. There are things you can do to avoid this. For whatever reason, the solo got out of whack and it needs to be calibrated again. If you notice that your solo is flying erratic for any reason, perform an IMU calibration. If you are still having problems after that, then you need to go to the Solo Owners group on Facebook and start asking questions. Do not continue trying to fly your bird out of frustration. You will destroy it. It will happen. You will hurt or damage or injure someone's property, yourself. Anything could possibly happen if it starts flying erratic. So, land it immediately, okay? If you can't, You can set up dead switches on the transmitter. Normally it's A and B at the same time. The Solo will drop dead no matter where it's at. Okay, if you set it up properly on the controller, you can put a kill switch on it. All right, it's going to send the death signal, beep, and it's going to hit the bird, and the bird's going to drop like a rock no matter where it's at. Okay, that is a good thing to know. All right. Another question I have is, when the Solo says manual mode, does that mean it's full manual mode? No, it does not. It would be like flying any other altitude hold bird without GPS. Same functionality as most of your toy quads. That's what it goes into, toy quad mode. That's what I'm going to call that, okay? Manual mode is not full manual. That is acro. Manual mode on this is basically altitude hold with gyro stabilization. So if you lose GPS, you need to know how to fly a little altitude hold manual quad, okay? Big thing to know. Do not be deceived by manual mode. It does not mean it has gone into acro full capability. You have full control over the Solo. You do not, okay? It is gyro stabilized altitude hold mode until it gets a GPS connection lock again. All right? Think about that. I get this question all the time. What's better, the Solo app or the Solix app? It's not even a question. The Solix app is 10 times more advanced, 10 times more stable, and there will be constant updates performed to it. The Solo app is done. Whatever's done to the Solo app now, there will be no other features added to it. There will be no more future updates. It is done. It is not nearly as advanced as the Solix app. Is the Solix app worth the $30? Absolutely. Absolutely. Not only does it work with the old school Solo, right, with the original Cube, but it also works with the Green Cube and everything else coming out for the Green Cube now if you guys decided to do the upgrade brain from Gestures Drones for $168. Buy the Green Cube, install it. There's a tutorial for how to do that, and then you will open up a whole bunch more advanced features for you using the Solix app, and you can also upgrade to Open Solo, okay? So, should you fly the Solo app over the Solix app? It's not even a question to me, guys. If you haven't experienced the Solix app and you have an Android device, it is a must-do. For those of you pilots that have iOS, I'm sorry you cannot use Solix, but they do have an app called SidePilot, which is also very cool, and you can do live streaming through SidePilot. Okay, so that is a very cool feature that we do not have as Android users quite yet. I'm curious if Kelly's ever going to push that. So, here's another fun one I get asked. How fast does the 3DR Solo go? Everyone is under the impression it goes 55 miles an hour, and you would not be wrong. It goes 55 miles an hour at full speed settings in GPS mode. Okay? If you remove GPS mode and put it in sport mode, we've seen speeds of 73 miles per hour. It flies, man. It is very fast and very dangerous, and you need to know what you're doing if you're flying in sport mode, okay, or full acro. These are not for average users. These are advanced settings, okay? They are for advanced pilots, not even intermediate pilots. Those settings are for advanced flyers only. If you do not feel comfortable flying out of GPS mode, don't even consider it with the Solo, because it is a 4-pound weapon at that point that can do a lot of destruction, all right? Think when you fly, guys. What happens when the Solo loses connection to the transmitter? Does it do what the Phantom does? Does it just sit there and hover until the battery gets too low and then it decides to come back on its own? Absolutely not. I gotta give Solo credit for this, but there are some dangers to this, and we're going to talk about those. If you send the Solo out and it loses connection, right, it will automatically beeline back to the transmitter and land itself, or it'll reconnect during the flight, and you'll see it on the board that it reconnects. You can hit fly and it'll stop its return to home and you can start flying again. That option is up to you, but think about this for a second. I want you to consider this. The Solo is fun to fly, but make sure that your RTH values are set how you think they should be for each flying situation. So I'm going to give you an example. So let's say you're down at a park, like me. I fly at River Hills Park, and I'm cruising down by the water in between the trees, and I'm having a good time, okay? If I don't take into consideration that the RTH value is only set for 30 feet, it's going to go up 30 feet and then come back. What do you think is going to happen if I start going by some tall trees and all of a sudden I lose signal? It's only going to go up 30 feet, and then it's going to start its return to home in a straight beeline back to the transmitter at 30 feet high. So if that means there's trees in the way that are 50 feet high, well, you can pretty much say sayonara to your Solo. So as you will notice when I fly, as I get around trees and stuff, and I think I'm going to start losing signal, I'll start to bring it up. Okay, I will guarantee that signal path. I'll give it that signal that it needs as I start going above the trees, and then I'll get higher. And as I go, I'll continue raising it up until I feel at a comfortable level that I can start going out further and further without any problems. So if it does RTH, it's not going to slam into a tree. It's going to come above the trees back to me and then back to its landing point. So just remember that. Focus on what your RTH values are before you go out and fly is something you really need to think about, all right? People get me this all the time. Well, the Phantom is so stable with its GPS lock. It's so stable compared to the Solo. Guys, if you give your Solo a chance to load some satellites before you take off, the stability performance is fine. If you wait until, okay, I got 7 satellites, I'm just going to take off. Well, it hasn't quite got a great position lock yet. Give the Solo an opportunity to collect a few satellites, okay? I know a lot of people adjust to like the Rev B board or, you know, an upgraded GPS and they get, you know, 15, 16 satellites, 22 satellites. But as the Open Solo guy said, there's no reason for all that. Anywhere from 10 to 13 satellites is fine, even 9 satellites. But give the bird a chance. Don't just immediately, as it's like, oh, the Solo's ready for takeoff, just take off. Give it a second to figure out where it's at, man. Just because it says it's ready doesn't mean it's quite finished calculating its position lock. It just means it's stable enough. If you give it a couple extra, like maybe a minute longer, then it will have a guaranteed good position lock almost every time. I have no problems. They'll sit there and just hover, you know, but if you just take off the moment it says it's ready, then, you know, it's not going to be stable. It's going to have a little drift factor until it figures out its exact position and hones in on that. So something to think about. Well, anyways, guys, that's all I got for you now. If you have more questions, go ahead and put them below. Don't forget, my address is in the description below. If you guys want to send me a piece of mail, a letter, hey, why I inspired, you know, you inspired me, whatever, you know, or if you want to trash talk me, feel free to send that letter too. If you got a package you want to send me or something cool you want me to check out, feel free to put those links in there. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the video. It definitely helps me. It supports me. If you guys like what I do, feel free to show that support, man. All right, guys, Drone Worship, I'm out. Toodaloo.